Hey folks, just a quick note. The episode you're about to hear includes discussion of political violence. This conversation was recorded prior to the assassination attempt on former President Trump. This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today is our July edition of Incentives and Instincts, a recurring series in which I speak with economist and friend Bryce Ward about some of the broader challenges facing our society. Bryce, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here as always.
So, a few months ago, we talked about a concerning rise in the need for chaos. And that rise seems unrelated to political ideology. At the same time, though, there's been a rise in sort of a productive form of centrism in Washington. A few things are actually getting done, it seems. So today we're going to try to square those two things. But before we get into it, let's redefine the need for chaos. What is it, and what do we know about it?
Need for chaos is basically a mentality where, for some reason, I'm disaffected with the system and I want to burn it all down.
It's this, your sort of proclivity to be in favor of burning down the system.
Yeah, and it's not partisan. Right. It's not just, I don't like the people who are in power.
And there's a status component to it too, is my understanding, that your interest is in throwing out the system, and through some unknown mechanism that will result in you achieving some higher status on the other side.
Yeah, it's not very well thought through.
Right.
And it's the same.
The disposition is not well through.
It's one thing to be like, oh yes, we're going to create chaos, and I have a plan in place to secure higher status.
Yeah.
That's frequently the subject of movies. You think that you're going to be in control, but the control is still with the person who has control. And you may or may not end up as the winner. Hey, we'll just win. The system is bad. I'm impressed by it. So if we tear it down, I will be better.
This is a construct that sort of is emerging as something new, and its antecedents are not well understood yet. An emerging candidate for a strong antecedent is this concept of social marginalization. Something is happening in your life that makes you feel marginalized, and so as a result, you're bracing against the system.
The interesting thing about need for chaos is it's not, let me build something to steer the system in a way that leaves me better off. It's, let's destroy the system and hope that whatever emerges from the ashes makes me better off.
Right. And this is especially concerning because need for chaos is strongly associated with support for forms of political violence.
Yes. Or, a paper that came out recently found that, strong partisanship is actually not that strongly related with support for political violence, whereas need for chaos is.
Okay, so we should draw that out, because a lot of the way we're presented with the state of affairs in our media environment is we're told that we're tremendously polarized, and we have a media ecosystem that is polarized, and that reinforces the polarization. And then we're told that this polarization is contributing to instability and the potential for violence in our society. Yet the research doesn't support that to the degree it's presented. What is maybe a stronger driver of the potential for political violence is this category of people that are endorsing the need for chaos.
Yeah, that seems to be what research is finding. And, look, in spite of the fact that we've been horrendously polarized for coming up on 30 years, we actually haven't seen a lot of political violence.
Yeah, it certainly seems like there have been times in our history that have been more violent. That's for sure.
Yeah. There is violence.
Yes.
And some of that violence has political undertones. So I don't want to say that there's certainly been various events that, you can say are linked to various political thoughts, but it kind of feels like it's a lot more need for chaos than just rank partisanship.
Yeah.
It's not a period of no violence, but the last time a president got shot was 1980.
Mm-hmm.
The last time a president got killed was 1960, right? It was every 20 years up until that, right? I mean, from Lincoln on, it was literally every 20 years.
Yeah, and then you think of 68 with King being
Martin Luther
assassinated,
King and
RFK,
and
Malcolm X shortly thereafter.
yeah, I mean,
Political assassinations have not been prevalent in recent years.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, certainly there were other extremely violent, political demonstrations that were turned violent.
So you've got this emerging sensibility. Then you've got the sort of storytelling around it. Storytelling is often portrayed through a political lens. And then you've got this sort of emergence of kind of a neo-populism, as journalist David Leonhardt describes it. And what we're getting to there is like we're living through this time where in recent years, it seems like Washington is actually coming to agreement on a few things. Skepticism of immigration, the notion that big business doesn't have our interests in heart. Some sort of traditionally populist ideas are kind of forming new coalitions in Washington across party lines with characters you might not expect. Describe what you see going on there.
There have been some significant bipartisan legislation in the last few years, although a lot of that was COVID driven, but even since, infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act were at least nominally bipartisan, there seems to be some agreement on that TikTok is bad. There's some degree of agreement on changing the way we trade with China. Although I think there's agreement that that's a problem. And there's agreement that it's a priority. I'm not sure there's agreement on policy.
Which in some ways, that's a normal process, to have an agreement across the parties that, hey, this is a problem. It's a problem we should act on. And then a debate about how to act on it. I mean, that's a normal process.
Yeah, and it's to the extent that this is different, right? So for a lot of the past few decades, there hasn't even been agreement on the problems.
Yes.
Right. So, I talk about 3 Ps, right? Problem, priority, policy. And when you see political disagreement, sometimes the disagreement is at the problem level. This isn't a problem. No, this is a problem. That's a pretty big impasse to get past.
Sure.
But we can try and marshal evidence. Oh, yeah, this is. And we do see movement on that, right? Like the opioid crisis, right? Like eventually we got to the point of widespread agreement. Sure. This is a problem. That's what's happening with the border. Okay, yeah, this is a problem. Trade, particularly trade with China, yeah, there seems to be some agreement that this is a problem. TikTok, that doesn't seem ideal to have state-controlled social media platform that's being controlled by a potentially adversary state.
Sure.
Okay, problem. And, then the next question, the priority, right? Okay, well, where does this fall in the ranking of things that we're trying, we have limited bandwidth to address things, and does it rise to the level of, yeah, we're going to actually try and address it? These seem to be priorities. The problems are big enough, they are evident to enough people that they have become priorities, and then now we're into the details.
And we should just press on priority for a moment. There is often agreement on priority. There's disagreement. I mean, that's sort of how the parties separate themselves in many ways. But there are also market forces for these policymakers to have disagreement on priority. They have disagreement on problem too. We've sort of seen with immigration, for example, right? Like sometimes on the right, it was more useful for Republicans to have immigration as an issue going into an election cycle than it was to actually work to solve the problem, because it was in their electoral advantage to have that remain as an issue they could campaign on.
We think this is a problem and we think it's a priority to deal with, but we don't want to deal with it because of politics, which I guess is the 4th P.
Sure.
Right?
This
isn't just, this is a problem, it's a priority, this is our policy, that all gets viewed or colored through the lens of politics of, well, if we do this, is that going to be good for us politically or not? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I mean, there's definitely been, or there appear to be moments that the parties decide, even though we think this is a problem, we're okay with the policy. We won't make it a priority because of politics.
Sure. Okay. A lot of P's in
A
there.
lot of peas.
Okay. So come together with priorities and then policy.
There's a problem. This is something we should do about. Now we start hammering out policy. So yeah, that's what we want the process to be. Every once in a while, things become potentially self-evident enough, and then politically feasible enough that you can get alignment. There's been some shift in either who the people are or what the perception of the size of the problem and how much of a priority is, that there's people now saying, hey, let's work together on policy and get the politics done. And so, yeah, I mean, that I'm not sure how much of a change this is, though.
Okay.
If you look at major legislation, it's not like we haven't seen more of it, right? You can expect about 10 per Congress. How many of those are bipartisan or not depends on whether or not one party has control, right?
Sure. Yep.
If one party has control, suddenly things become not bipartisan
Mm-hmm.
because they don't need to be bipartisan, right? It's an intra-coalition fight. You fight, it's the Affordable Care Act, right? We figure out what we can do as a coalition. They at least tried to make it bipartisan, for political reasons. That was made impossible. And so it becomes a single party thing, right? And that happens when, you see that in the data. When one party has control, like, you see less bipartisan legislation. But we still pass legislation every Congress. Now, the 60s and 70s were much more productive, but the coalitions were weird. I certainly am willing to buy the notion that there's this neo-populism aspect, that, neoliberalism is on the outs,
Mm-hmm.
right? This notion that just let markets do their thing and freedom and prosperity will exist everywhere. While that might be true, we've given it a long run, and it didn't turn out that if we just opened up trade with China, that it would become a liberal Western society. So now you're seeing some backlash to that, and then that creates different views of what problems are, different views of what priorities are, different views of what the right policies are.
So when we think about this rise of the need for chaos and this sort of shift toward neo-populism, coupled with some actual problem solving, like, are those two forces in opposition, or do you see a positive connection between the two?
I'm not sure that the productivity in Congress is necessarily being driven as a response to people's need for chaos. And I'm not sure that people's need for chaos responds to what Congress does. Another paper came out recently which found that there's almost no election relationship to good governance. Like, passing policies, implementing policies that are popular does not get you rewarded at the ballot box. Because we've made politics entertainment, and I don't think that the people that are deep in the weeds of need for chaos are closely following the machinations of whether the system works or not.
Yeah, although there's probably a relationship in the sense that there are policies that contribute to social marginalization for various folks, and that could therefore drive need for chaos. They are related, but maybe in the immediate sort of mindset of the actor, not as much. We'll be back to my conversation with Bryce Ward after this short break. A New Angle is proudly presented by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. This show does not happen without these pillars of our community, and I'm so grateful for their support and encouragement. And speaking of support, have you checked out our new website yet? anewanglepodcast.com. There you can support our show directly with a variety of subscription options. Subscribers get access to bonus episodes, additional segments, writings, and other benefits. So check it out at anewanglepodcast.com.
This is Meg Oliver, CBS News correspondent, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Welcome back to A New Angle. I'm here with Bryce Ward, discussing the rise in both the need for chaos as well as collaboration.
The question we have to ask is, A, are there always going to be socially marginalized people? To the extent that our policies are addressing social marginalization, is it reducing the scale or is it just shifting who is marginalized?
Just moving that class of folks around.
And the other thing, which I think plays into this, and again, this is the problem where we don't have the long-term data, right? This is a new concept. It's only been measured recently, right? So
2023 paper introduced the construct.
Yeah, so we don't have the ability to be like, oh, this is how many people are in the need for chaos camp over time, and this is what causes it to shift or doesn't shift, and whatever it might be, I mean, my concern is that we've talked a lot about social media and the internet environment and how the media environment has changed. I feel like some of what those changes, I think they amplify, seed, and create need for chaos.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it may not have anything to do with actual policy. A lot of this is I marinate in this negative media environment, and the only response that makes me feel is that these people are all bad and that they're evil and that the system should go away, right? But again, I don't know that, right? Because I can remember my friends' dads in high school who were like, the system is terrible. It's all just corrupt. I knew those people. This is where it's difficult, right? Without some sort of long-term time series to be like, well, okay, it seems not ideal to have 15 million people in the United States who would fall into this need for chaos camp. To have them exist in a world where they can all connect and communicate with each other, and recruit more and create more gravity. So it seems like it's a problem, right? And yes, it would be lovely to be like, oh, well, this is, these economic conditions make it go away, or this level of support for the government makes it go away, or whatever it is, so that we could move the needle. And, we'll get this now going forward, but, ideally we'd be sitting there going, oh yeah, 1968 was a high period of need for chaos, and then these things happened and it went away, right? Or whatever it is. And so now we're sitting there kind of in this, maybe like if we can convince people that Washington is highly functional, then the need for chaos will go away.
Presumably, I mean, we're in a shifting landscape. Landscape's always shifting, but you go through, larger waves of it. And we're at this time where there are different incentives facing our leaders. There's certainly a category of politicians, and we've talked about it, on this show before, that are kind of catering to different audiences, right? The Matt Gaetzes and Marjorie Taylor Greens and even AOC to a certain degree are perhaps cultivating the need for chaos, in the sense that they're arguing the system's not working and it's not working for you, and the system is corrupt. Right. And then you've got folks that are not interested in playing the social media game or the talking head game on cable TV to the same extent, and are maybe more interested in actually trying to go to Washington to solve problems. And they're appealing to a different constituency, perhaps.
In an ideal world, that second group would be who we all would agree, let's just find people who agree with us that these are the problems, who understand that we'll make these a priorities, and we'll implement this type of policy. I'm not convinced that that's what's happened in a lot of elections recently. From at all levels of government, right? I do feel like our current media system actually wants us to select politicians who might be higher on the need for chaos scale.
It does seem like there is an interest in covering extremism, both from the media and from the scholarship or the political scientists who are covering it.
This is all part of the same thing, right? Which is we are animals who evolved in certain ways, and our evolutionary programming says, pay attention to things that are problems.
Right.
So if you can create a scary problem, I will pay attention to it. And attention is currency. in the way that we do everything, right? So
Absolutely. More than ever.
if you're an academic, attention is good. Attention means that people know who I am and they'll pay attention to what I say. Same thing happens in the media. So as long as we have not figured out how to hack our programming so that we're not chasing whatever scary thing is being told to us, we haven't been able to arrest ourselves out of that cycle because we're programmed that way.
Well, not only are we programmed that way, like the technology driving media is sort of creating a positive feedback loop around it. Like, no longer are there the classifieds in newspapers that provide us pretty much neutral source of revenue. Right now, our systems are such that they make more money if they hold our attention for longer. And the way they do that, they figured it out, is to enrage us more.
That's where I think this amplification of need for why I'm concerned that we may be in an artificially high share of the population who is endorsing need for chaos and maybe not even paying attention to or acknowledging the fact that sometimes Washington really does identify problems and try and solve them in ways that are popular.
You mentioned this a couple of months ago, that you think our current political parties are made up of coalitions that seem to want to break up. Right? So this could also be a reshuffling and a competition among our elected officials for an emergent constituency that is yet to sort of form a political coalition. But they've recognized that, hey, these problems appear to be nonpartisan in their importance to Americans. Like, we're going to compete for figuring out how to solve them.
If you want the system to persist, that's the ideal way of doing it, right? You kind of keep banging your head against the wall with these established coalitions. You say, we're not getting anywhere. And then let's go find problems that aren't coded into obviously one camp or the other. And let's see if we can, the child tax credit.
Yeah.
Left and right can agree that supporting families is good.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we have problems with families without enough money. We have a problem with too few families. Great. Let's try and solve those problems. Left and right, I think, agree on that.
Yes.
Right. And it was a priority. We got at least a temporary version of it in 2021. Now we're like, oh, wow, that really did work. I saw papers this week. Parents' mental health was substantially improved. Wow. Right. Kids' outcomes are better. Okay. And now they passed the House. It's just bogged down in the priorities of the Senate. But there's at least some prioritization of it. And there's again, while there's lots of disagreement on policy details, there's a solution just sitting there for a coalition to come and form around it. It's not a coincidence that it's external forces that are the other thing that seem to be driving a lot of this, right? China. Maybe we should be worried about China.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, well, the easiest thing to get a group of actors to agree upon is that somebody outside of the circle is
Introduce
bad.
an external threat.
Yeah,
and you're got to form some unity.
And it's like, China and Russia and North Korea and Iran, they're all making these moves together. Oh, we should maybe be concerned about, and so those types of things create opportunity to reshuffle coalitions. And, I know that there's others out there. Housing doesn't code. There are NIMBYs on both sides and there are YIMBYs on both sides.
Yes.
Energy abundance. The abundance agenda doesn't have to be coded into one party or the other. Now there's going to be winners and losers and trade-offs, right? And that then creates then the opportunities for coalitions to break apart, reform. And, next thing you know, you're basically those people that you used to call the evil devils. They're now part of your coalitions.
Yeah.
And, you guys were focused off on these issues. And it's like, great, we're going to now fight about X and Y instead of the old things that we've been fighting about for however long we've been fighting with the I mean, there's always little shifts in coalition, election to election. That's why you don't have the same people winning all the time. There hasn't been short-run big shifts. There's been long-run shifts in coalition, right? Like the shift of affluent, educated people from Republicans to Democrats, right? And you're seeing some shift at the working class in the other direction. So there are shifts underway, which then is why you're like, oh yeah, these coalitions are somewhat fragile. But in that opportunity of, if there is actual fragility, if we can keep that fragility from getting snuffed out in some way, there's an opportunity that you'll see whatever, the neo-populist moment maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? And who knows if it's proactive or reactive, really? We don't quite know, right? Are these people responding to the incentive that, oh yeah, maybe we should address the fact that people have lost faith in what we do and they want to throw us all out? Maybe we should figure out how to solve a problem. Or maybe they're going to solve these problems and then people are going to feel like, oh, maybe these people can do their jobs.
The concerning thing is the media environment doesn't work in a way that allows me to fairly assess the functionality of the system, because the incentives are all for everybody to tell me that the system doesn't work, right? The only time that I hear about the system functioning is when you talk to legislators, right? Because they'll be like, oh yeah, we all get along, right? Yeah, there's some that we don't like, but for the most part, we can work together. We can figure things out. And I can't remember, but the Montana legislature passed hundreds of bills the last session.
Yeah.
And they will do so again next winter. And not all of those will just be partisan ram-throughs. So, but the problem is that we don't exist in a world that is very clear that, oh, these are the problems, these are the priorities, these are the policies, and these are where these politicians differ on those things. It's very much like, oh, I'm just going to keep you with an identity and a tribe. And what I would love to see is if we had some objective ranking of these are the problems, these are the priorities, and these are the trade-offs that voters want. And then I went back and I looked at that list of bills that got passed. Did we address the big problems with the right priorities, with the policies that people support? And I'm not saying they didn't. I'm saying I don't feel like I know that. And I know that some of the reporters have done some really cool things, tracking bills and trying to do some big picture look backs. But I don't know the first piece, right? Like, I know what I think is important, but I would love to know at the national level, the local level, the state level, what are the big problems that people want addressed? And I'm guessing if I got 100 random Montanans in a room, some very clear themes about things that they're worried about would emerge. And I don't feel like those themes are necessarily the main things that get addressed. And that's where, there's a little bit of maybe a breakdown in this system.
That seems like a good place to land it, Bryce. As always, thank you. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Justin.
Okay, so now we'll turn our attention to our listener question for the month. It comes from Rita Collins of Eureka, Montana.
My name is Rita Collins, and I live in Eureka, Montana. A question I have is about mental health services in rural Montana. I will say in my part of the state, these services are mostly non-existent, especially for individuals with limited income. Why is this happening, and what can be done to improve the situation? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rita, for the question. Bryce, you've studied this quite a bit. Your work with the Rural Institute and other sort of healthcare inquiries that you've done. What are your thoughts for Rita?
I mean, the fundamental issue in rural healthcare is just scale. If you don't have enough people in a particular location to generate enough income for a provider, you don't get providers. Unless some entity intervenes to subsidize that provider, right?
Okay.
So whether that's a government or a nonprofit or somebody that says, hey, let's provide this missing service in this place. But the fundamental issue with rural healthcare is just that the people are spread out and they'll drive to some collection point if they're having a heart attack.
Yeah.
It's
But the economics behind like building a new hospital in Eureka don't make a lot of sense.
No, and that's,
So you need subsidy to do that.
Yeah, and rural hospitals.
That's all the time we have for this episode. If you'd like to hear more of this conversation and receive other exclusive content, please consider a paid subscription. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Killy Larson is our producer. Maddie Jordan is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. And Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.